you to the Digital Technologies Modernise, Digitise or Die panel discussion. I'd like to start welcoming the panel, perhaps Andy, if you don't mind introducing yourself to start with.
Yeah, sure. My name's Andrew Gamblin. I am the Digital Platform Solutions Manager for Collider, which is a new part of the Wilmot Dixon business, which is specifically focused at revolutionizing the way that we do construction through tech enablement and digital processes and digital technology.
Scott? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Scott Sanderson, and I'm a partner at PRP. PRP is a housing specialist where our core business is architecture, but we have other disciplines, including fire safety consultants, project management, landscape design. And my role in the business focuses on technical design and BIM, so really passionate about information quality, compliance, safety standards on this discussion.
Johnny.
Hi, Johnny Furlong, BIM strategy lead at L&Q Housing Association, and I also vice chair the Golden Thread Initiative, which is sponsored by the MHCLG, or Department of Levelling Up as they are now.
Yeah, I'm George Stevenson. I'm Managing Director of Active Plan, which is a software company involved in BIM and the management of asset information. But I'm also chair of BIM for Housing, and I chair the Asset Information Group within the Golden Thread Initiative that John has just mentioned.
I'm Ken Davey. I'm an architect. I actually first registered in 1981, so a fair bit of experience in the design and obviously the architecture business. I'm here because I look at DFMA for the offsite for the supply chain school, which obviously is driven by digital input. So without DFMA, we can't have modern methods or offsite production. But DFMA again is driven by this move towards digitization.
And I'm Nick Horton, Head of Marketing at Sapphire. Been with Sapphire 15.5 years. And we'll be looking at both digital technologies, BIM and so on, but also some of the new techniques, MMC, or perhaps not so new techniques, which are classified as MMC. For those of you in the audience, you can continue using the same slider if you're already logged on. For those who may get to log on, it's sli.do. There's an app, or you can go on the online to it, and the code is 537970. It's sli.do. It's 537970. And welcome to anyone from Canada joining us for your first discussion today. So, question number one, and I'm going to aim this your way, George, if that's right. How can implementing digital tools of BIM help unlock the inefficiencies in our industry?
Well, if we're able to use BIM in a way that is managing digital information, we've got the opportunity to deliver to people much better structured information about what's required, and also to map that to the information that's being delivered. And as a result of that, we can start to look at processes that can then bring in levels of standardization and increase that levels of productivity. So,
Scott, what's your thoughts on this one?
I think if you look at it from a design perspective, I think high quality information supports higher quality discussions and better decision making. So it's really about achieving process efficiency, a more rounded and complete view of a project proposal, and the team having a more rounded and complete understanding of the project.
Andrew?
Kind of like what George was mentioning, BIM is a process, and the best way, or when BIM is implemented correctly, and the process is understood and used by all on a particular project, you get that standardized information, which allows those better decisions, allows that better design. But one of the big things with a lot of the BIM and the technology is to make sure that everyone has access to the information at the point in time that they need access to it. So we can have the best companies following BIM, we can have the best technology implementing the BIM process, but if the person on site who's installing the ductwork doesn't get the information through when they need it, and they install the ductwork before the pipework goes in, you will still end up with issues. So it's very much about making sure that it's democratized information in terms of BIM and the process.
Ken?
I see BIM as an enabler. George mentioned the word productivity, and I think the one way to improve productivity across the construction sector is to actually take some of the activities away from the site. So we're looking at construction industrialization, but I don't think construction industrialization can be fully implemented without actually having really good information management and transfer, which then leads into what I've been looking at for the supply chain school, which is designed for manufacture and assembly. So I think I see BIM as an enabler. It's a tool. It's not obviously the golden bullet, as it were.
Sure, and we've had a really great question come in, is how do we change the conversation that BIM is Revit and Revit is BIM? So this is quite a good one there. So George, I think this is definitely your territory to start with.
Well, I think the most important thing to say is that BIM is not about 3D modelling. And that's one of the things that we're hammering home at BIM for Housing, because that disenfranchises so many people in the supply chain that have got so much to contribute. BIM is about better information management. And one way of using that information effectively is through 3D modelling. But it's a subset of the ways in which that information can be used. So in particular, my particular interest is about asset information, and the way in which we can actually use the information is what can often deliver the real value through the process. We've had conversations today about competency and carbon, and all of those things are enhanced by providing the right type of information. And Revit's an excellent application. We're Revit developers, but it's designed for a particular function, and it shouldn't be used to do things that it's not really designed for.
To take you a bit of a different start on that question, Johnny, if BIM is Revit and Revit is BIM, I guess it wouldn't be much use to the golden thread side of things.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about, in practical terms, how that translates.
Yeah, so I actually think the golden thread will actually really help with this conversation, because you know they're very much sort of aligned with each other. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of people, you say BIM to them and first thing they think about is 3D modeling, virtual reality, all of that stuff, and that's great and has its place. But you know, the golden thread's a huge amount more than that. So obviously, I think actually in itself the golden thread has a bit of a there's a bit of a, I think in the industry people still don't really understand what the golden thread is. Obviously, I'd advise people to go and look at publication that BRAC have. They have a report on the principles of what golden thread is. Obviously, the golden thread it's about the information that allows you to understand the building and then the steps needed to keep the building and the people inside it safe. So when we start to think about that, you then start to think, okay, what do I need? And it really is about information management, about control, about management processes. And this is where like all the principles of BIM, using the UK BIM framework, are a way to do that. I don't think the legislation definitely isn't going to say you must use BIM and you must use UK BIM framework. But then you have to think about, if you don't use that process and you use your own one, are you going to be able to convince the regulator that you're managing the information and controlling the risks in your building appropriately? Do you fully understand how your building is working, including how people interact with that building? And I think people won't. So again, BIM is all about the control of information management processes. And I think stop talking about BIM in some ways and start, and I think it will help at the conversation to hold golden thread. I really think it's going to move the industry forward in its understanding of what BIM really is.
Yeah, and certainly for those who perhaps it might be new light to them in that regard. Is the framework and BIM stages, that diagram with the line that's about collaboration clearly at the bottom, isn't it? If we perhaps move on to a slightly different but related one, how can we address difficulties surrounding facades in BIM and considering the design throughout different stages of that? So a bit about the collaboration there. Scott, what's your thoughts on this one?
So I guess if the question is specifically around fire safety and facades, we're looking very closely at the gateway requirements and obviously the incoming legislation around the Building Safety Bill. I'm thinking really closely at what's the specific information deliverable at each stage, what's the level of detail, the level of granularity, and the level of commitment, for that matter, that's appropriate at Gateway 1 planning versus 2 and 3. So I guess it's progressively layering up the information and the level of fixity in the project. And from an architectural design perspective, it's marrying up the development of the graphical model with the information that supports it. So we think the direction of travel will be a much more structured approach to gateway approvals. We see that in how we want to develop our own process, and we now increasingly see it in developing client brief, much more prescriptive and precise at the information requirements for each stage. So our challenge ultimately is to control our own workflow efficiently to hit those data requirements efficiently at each stage, and to be clear and complete as we hand over information and make sure it's fully validated and supported by an evidence base that backs up the performance we claim.
Andrew, what about from a contractor's viewpoint?
I think the vast majority of contractors now appreciate the level of information that's going to be required from them moving forwards. Post-Grenfell Building Safety Bill, there's a lot of people who understand that, yes, you can do it in a traditional method in terms of collating the information in your standard way, getting the PDF sheets, filling in forms, trying to do things that way. But they recognize that it's inefficient, it doesn't work, and there must be a better way of doing things, which is where, as was mentioned, the UK BIM framework comes into play. You have a great set of guidance there that can run you through how to better control the information on your projects, ensure that everyone clearly understands what information needs to be provided and when, and the formats in which it needs to be provided. So the systems and the processes are all in place, and I think from a contractor's perspective, they're starting to push more and more for this to come through, as more and more customers now are starting to ask for projects in line with the UK BIM framework, which there's some discussion as to whether or not that term physically should exist, but it's like the old, you must provide BIM level 2, which was always a fun discussion to be had as to what actually constituted BIM level 2. But at the same time, because people are asking for this, they're understanding their facilities maintenance requirements at the end, the asset information they need to contain and hold. They're pushing that onto the contractor to provide that, which means they're then pushing that down to the supply chain, who are then starting to be upskilled or understand a bit more in terms of what's going on.
If you're saying that the contractor should supply that information to BIM level 2, shouldn't that information already be there? Why do you turn it around? If the BIM's been done rightly on the drawing board, it should be coming from the other direction. You're leaving it, you've got the onus on the contractor to provide that information, right?
So, sorry, George.
Yeah, I was just going to say the designers won't know what products and materials are going into the building.
Isn't there part of that BIM to actually know the life of the building and specify the products, the use and the lifespan? Part of BIM was that, not the original concept?
It certainly is, but there's different.
Why are you pushing it back to the contractor?
Because the contractor is responsible for part of the BIM process.
But aren't the designers responsible? The contractor is the assembler of the products.
So
they're both responsible. They're responsible
Yeah.
for different parts of it at different times, and it's about working to the same process is where it really comes about this collaborative way, about understanding who has to provide the information, when they've to provide it, as you're saying, and that's what BIM is. So the contractor has some responsibility, the client has some responsibility, the architect has some. They all have a responsibility, and it's about that being clear and well structured.
And you use the word you, yeah? It's everybody, it's we.
Correct.
It's the project team.
It's
Yes.
the whole project team, not the individual, it's the whole.
No, you're absolutely right. It's
Probably sitting there saying you as if it's a team effort, isn't it?
it's very much a team effort. It's
And then
collaboration.
that's where the joint up thinking.
But that depends on the type of contract that's being used. This is one of the issues that comes out. Yeah.
Contract like BIM working on site, and what point does the issues of BIM collecting information, how does that manifest itself to the man with the bricks, the tools, the plaster? How does that really? That's the sharp end. Now, doing the paperwork exercise is wonderful, but in reality, someone's got to go to the site and make it all work.
No, you're absolutely right.
And that's where the challenges really are. I mean, talk is great, but at the end of the day, someone's got to put it all together. And it's easy to play here, but on the builder side, rainy day, what is the concrete cover, where do you actually capture, and how do you expect the man on the site to actually go around, collect the information, and put it together to satisfy the building safety manager? And this is not fit and fire doors.
Yeah, you're quite right, and that's one of the reasons why within BIM for housing, what we're trying to do is move it beyond the modelling bit, because one of the most important pieces in this jigsaw are the procurement teams, because the procurement teams who are organising the purchasing of the products and materials, let's say in a specialist subcontractor, they know what products they're buying, don't they? And therefore, they need to get from the manufacturers the information about the products that are being installed, and then the person that's actually installing it nearly has to record perhaps the serial number.
Recording the serial number doesn't actually resolve anyone's right, the duty of care of someone recording. The supplier will only supply what he's been asked to do.
Exactly.
So who knows where's the checkpoint and saying that is the right product, that will perform a fire door, that will, or a vapor controller, that will perform exactly to the original design intent.
And that's exactly
the problem I'm
absolutely, and that's exactly why the information requirements needs to be set out at the beginning. So
it's not the word you, it's the design team. Go back to it's the design team needs to be very clear on either a performance or a product.
Well, with respect, it's actually before the design team. So it's the client that needs to define what the requirements are. The asset management team needs to do that, and that then comes through.
If they're able.
Ken, I think you've got quite a lot of experience in this.
I know. I was going to pick up on the question, which was how do you address the difficulties surrounding facade design from from an architectural and a facade engineering point of view. And I think BIM would be the means of actually, it's a tool to use. And who has to input to the BIM model, who has to provide the information and the data, I think will vary depending on what type of contract you're working on, what type of project you're working on, how much collaboration there is. It's quite difficult. I think the supply chains themselves have got a long way to go to understand this. I worked on a hospital project where the principal contractor set up a training course for the supply chain to try and make them understand just what level of data was required, what level of information was required, such that when the scheme was finished, when the development was finished, the BIM model would have the appropriate level of information and data to be used for the operation and maintenance. And there is this big gap at the moment as to what the architects put into, say, a BIM, although they tend to concentrate on Revit, which isn't actually BIM at all. What then comes in from the supply chain, and then who takes responsibility. But some of the tier ones are taking responsibility for ownership of the BIM model and trying to make sure that the information and the data that goes into it is appropriate and what's needed for the construction and operation of the buildings.
Unsurprisingly, we've been talking about BIM in the majority of it, but technologies is more broad than just BIM. In terms of one of the questions we've got here is around supporting the golden thread. We've obviously talked about the information chain with Johnny and the points he made. In in future, how can we use other forms of technology in actually making the actually achieving the golden thread and improving the safety standards in the industry? Andrew, I'd be quite interested in some of the. I know you're doing quite a lot on sites and so on with technology broadly, but
it's using for my personal opinion on all this is that you need to use the right technology for the right situation. You're not going to throw a VR headset on a scaffolder when he's going up the scaffold. It doesn't make any sense for him to do that. Right? It's just not safe. But before he comes to site, putting him in a VR headset for him to understand what the site constraints are going to be has some value. It's the same with all the collection of information and people understanding what information it is they need to collect and when, as they're installing products. You have to provide the people on the site who are physically doing the installation, those who are going to be at the sharp end of the stick, they have to have the technology which is simple, easy, clear for them to use. And for them, it might be sending, for example, a WhatsApp message to a project number that just basically says, door 01, this is the serial number. But that system that's behind it enables basically filling in of the various different parameters and the other technology sheets in the background. So from the user's point of view, i.e. the person who's collecting the information, they think they're just chatting to a chatbot. But in reality, that's tying information back into the model. That is then allowing you to follow through the golden thread. Everyone loves to see the great augmented reality, mixed reality, headsets and all these phenomenal things that look really cool. And they do, they are brilliant. But the viability of them on the day-to-day basis for someone who frankly can just about use a smartphone, it's not necessarily a good thing to give them any more tech than that. Let them understand what it is that they can understand, and if they can use a simple app, if they can send a message to something, and that provides them the ability to fill in the information for the golden thread, that's where we want to get to. But it's finding that technology piece. That's the interesting part.
How about, Johnny, on some of the technologies outside of digital technologies, and maybe this is perhaps more of a question for Ken, but in terms of functional innovations and so on, which can be brought to the table, as well as these kind of aspirational, futuristic things?
Yeah, I think we're obviously technology is just the enabler. You need to be what is it that you're trying to achieve? It always has to be it. Are you, is it about record keeping? What's a process you're trying to do? I think it was brought up earlier. I think photography and different forms of photography are going to be really big part going forward. We obviously, when we talk about digital, the early stages, the design stages, really digital already. People get it. Is it going to change a bit with golden thread? Sure, but they already get it. I think digital side's really coming into construction, and then obviously into the operations. We have way more existing buildings than we ever have, new buildings, and it's about finding the right appropriate types of technology and why are you doing it. So I think photography is a really big part of what's going to come true. As they were saying, really simple tools. It needs to be that people can go out there and just find the information that they need to do the task that they're there to do, whether that's just scanning a barcode so that they can then open up and find the manual of fix the part that they need to, or to record an issue, raise a complaint, whatever it is that they need to do. So I think it's, for me, I think some of the really fancy stuff is cool, but I think in the end, it will be the really dull, boring stuff, processing back in databases and stuff. That's where all the power will be. At the front end, people are just going to see a phone, and just like we live our lives on our phones, it's the same for the construction workers. They're just going to all do the same thing: install a fire barrier or a cavity bar, whatever it is, snap it with their phone, record done. Back end, all the interesting stuff is happening. It's going into the golden thread. It's helping to produce that case for the building.
Ken, what's your practical experience in other technologies?
Use of tablets instead of notebooks proved quite efficient on large construction sites. So it's improved productivity towards the end of a job quite significantly, allowing the site management team to record and eliminate legacy issues. And that was just almost like using the technology as a notebook, but it was a notebook they could take with them, and they didn't actually have to go back into the office to fire up a desktop or a laptop. So there's potential to improve productivity. I think the camera approach is quite fascinating because it needs to be taken to another level. It's not just about, to me, it's not just about using a phone. To me, it should actually be some means of taking a photograph, which then is actually globally positioned. Mm-hmm. So that technology, that image, relates to a specific point in a building, which then can be recorded. And there were moves afoot on some of the national highways projects to actually do that, is to record the information out on site, using obviously global positioning of some kind to record it. So we've got BIM, we've got Revit, we've got different technologies and being used, but I think there's a step up. And the other thing which might become very important, because a lot of the likes of Revit to me is for new buildings. It's not for the existing building stock. So how do we deal with the existing building stock? And I think we have to perhaps look at laser scanning and trying to capture our existing stock in a digital manner, but it's not using the digital, the software that the designers are using at the moment.
Interesting points, and it's kind of coming through quite clearly that you need to be clear on what you're trying to achieve, understanding what you're solving. But George, how do we get that clarity?
Well, I think looking at what as Johnny was saying earlier, being able to define what it is you actually want out at the end is absolutely critical. One of the interesting things I was asked this morning was about digital twins. What is a digital twin? And is it about data? Is it about technology? Actually, in my view, it's about the data, because the technology will change over the life of a building. It's going to change. So the critical thing there is to make sure that you've got the right data that can be consumed in many different ways. So I think that's where we need to be going. The other thing I would say, and this is a challenge that we've got with the Golden Thread initiative, is there is a view that digital means PDFs or includes PDFs. Now, it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is that a PDF is a static document. It was framed and produced for a particular purpose, whereas the Golden Thread needs to be able to respond to different levels of query. It needs to be driven by what risk is it that you're managing, and then how can you pull together the information that you need to satisfy that particular risk. And if you've got a particular output that is, say, a data sheet from a manufacturer, it may not provide you with the information that you need to satisfy that particular risk, or it may provide you with far too much information, and it therefore can't be easily consumed. So therefore, although PDFs are an important element in the data, they cannot replace the digital information. So coming back to the point, that it really needs to be data rather than the technology that's being used to create the data or even consume it.
Johnny, what's your thoughts on this one?
From Ryan's, the question again was on how do we know what information?
Getting that clarity.
Yeah, so I think with hard work and competency, I think the first thing is regarding the Golden Thread, we can't just outsource it. You know, I think that's been our traditional approach to many things in the industry, pay somebody else to do it. And, you know, ultimately the responsibility is going to land with principal designer, principal contractor, client, duty holders, accountable people. And they need to understand, they need to have a very good level of understanding of what it is they need. They need to understand their buildings, be able to manage their risks, and you can't outsource that. And that comes with spending time, bringing in expertise, really spending the time and the energy to find out what it is that you need for your organization to be able to manage and control the building and the risks, and be able to produce and have that golden thread and be able to produce a safety case and safety case reports. So I think, yeah, it's lots of effort, lots of learning, upskilling, competency,
There's a related question actually on this. Is it's hard when you don't know what the end result is for the client, what they need. Perhaps this is one for you as well, following on from what you've just commented. What's your take on that? What does a client need in relation to that information?
Yeah, so that's trying to depends on what we're talking about here. You know, again, it's understanding what is it they're trying to do. Are we talking about what is their need to produce a building safety case, or what is their need to provide services to the resident? It's about that sitting down and doing that hard work, understanding what things are, putting it down in writing processes, you know, writing information requirements. You know, it's lots of like dull, boring stuff. The technology then and the digital really helps with all of that, because you can then automate it, you can validate it, check it automatically, you can collect it easier, you can get after it. But a big part is for clients having to sit down and do that hard legwork, understanding what are your requirements for each individual need, and then look at them holistically. There's no point in saying, I need a piece of information to do X, but not thinking about how that relates to providing customer service or billing to a resident. You know, how does that, for instance, thing on fire alarms relate to service charges? You have to sit down and look at this as a whole, and there's so much information, which is where then technology comes in, because once you start getting vast amounts of technology or vast amounts of information and data, it's the technology that helps you find that, organize it, manage it, control it, you know, provide that golden thread.
So we've had a question come in saying, how do you overcome the problems with trade-specific technologies which don't talk to each other during this construction process? Scott, you've probably got experience in this bit.
Yeah, I think there is a big challenge around collaborative, you know, really achieving collaborative working with model information or data arriving from multiple sources. As architects and lead designers, we often find ourselves kind of in the middle of that. It can be very challenging. So I think it's, I mean, I guess picking up some of the comments already made, it's about clarity on the objective. You know, what am I trying to achieve by integrating or federating this information? So is it about primary geometry and I'm looking at fit? Is it about performance? I want different information. So it goes back to that clear plan, objectives. Is it, you know, design coordination? Is it compliance and validation? Is it justifying performance? Each part of the team thinking very carefully about what it is they're trying to achieve as the interface with another member of the team. So it's not about pushing all the information into one place. In fact, hopefully it's not about pushing all the information in one place. It's about kind of layers of information and different streams of information and moving in the same direction towards a high quality database at the end of the job. But you talk, the different bits of the project and the different team members can speak to each other in a common language towards that objective, without getting too cluttered and too on top of each other that frustrates the process.
That makes a lot of sense. And Ken, what's your experience from an architecture point of view?
Well, Nick, I'm just thinking that BIM level 2 was mentioned earlier on, and MOD mandated BIM level 2 for their frameworks. And obviously the contractors working on these frameworks took responsibility to attempt to achieve that level 2, because I don't think when it was mandated, they didn't fully understand it. But the point of this story is that the MOD didn't tell the companies who were actually maintaining the estate that they were going to get BIM level 2, and they didn't bother to. They hadn't tendered the maintenance of the estate in the right way to include interpretation of the data. So as architects and contractors, it was a waste of time actually delivering the information, because the people actually who would have benefited from using the information couldn't interpret it. So from an architectural perspective, it's a case of basically repeating what's been said across the panel, understand what your client needs, understand what your client can use practically before you launch into a massively complicated, all singing, all dancing federated model.
Nick, I was just going to add that I think there's a very positive shift in the market, actually. As a consultant who receives lots of briefs from different clients, I would say particularly this year, there's been a significant shift in the quality and completeness of the briefing information we're receiving from our clients. And it's really challenging us, to take stock and plan, which I guess is the whole point. But there is definitely a shift in the market.
You've kind of answered one of the next questions, which is the concept of BIM has been around 20 to 30 years, and the industry is still trying to understand what is it and so on. What changes are going to happen over the next 3 to 10 years which will actually make a difference? What you're seeing there is a trend towards it. What do you think is the driver behind that?
The fire safety mandate requirement impetus is a very, very clear driver for the housing sector. Much needed, long overdue, and that is a point of laser focus for our business and for our clients. The timeline's aggressive and requires a huge amount of energy and commitment within projects and offline commitment. Number of initiatives, Golden Thread initiatives been mentioned, the work that George and colleagues do with BIM for Housing. There's a lot of people putting a huge amount of time in offline to try and work out a robust and complete response to this objective, which is actually ultimately a very simple question and a sort of binary yes or no. Is the building safe? Are you happy? Yes or no? All of that data we're gathering is going to funnel up for an individual or one business and say yes. Massive challenge.
Okay, for George.
Yeah, I'd just like to build on what Scott was saying there. The whole point about BIM Level 2 originally, it was driven from asset management. That was the objective. That was the government's objective, to actually get better information about what products and materials go in the buildings. One of the reasons it hasn't been as successful as it should have been is because the design and construction process is so fragmented. And therefore, we don't actually get the handover information in the way that we need. But that driver is still there. We still need to know what products and materials go in the buildings. Now, if we then take that, the operational performance of the buildings as being an important driver, and then we overlay the need for knowing what products and materials have gone in the buildings from a fire safety point of view, it's the same information. It's just different parameters. And now we've got exactly the same thing that's driving us now with carbon. So we've got three important business drivers that are all looking for the same outcome. And that's knowing what products and materials have gone in the building, how they were installed, and being able to do stuff with that information. And I think that's the real big driver that we're going to see change coming from.
Andrew, what's your experience with this?
Kind of like what's already been said, in all honesty. There's been a dramatic increase in the number of customers that have come in, projects that have been specifying BIM requirements. As George said, to begin with, a lot of the time we were providing COBie information and massive spreadsheets to Joe the caretaker, who'd been working at the same school for 30 years and fixed things with a hammer. So his technological need for that was relatively low. But we are seeing a massive increase in people asking for the clear structured data as time is going on, particularly in the residential sector. And I was up at CIH not too long ago, and the number of stands that were there that were talking about digital information in some way, shape or form, software companies that were providing point solutions to help local authorities, registered providers all look after their residents. All of that has to be based off data. And even if they don't necessarily follow the golden thread side of things, in terms of they may not be fully aware of what's happening with the golden thread, which would be shocking if they don't, they will be aware of the requirement for data because of these systems, because they can see how valuable it is for them to understand what is going on within their properties, understanding where things are, where things need to be fixed, etc., etc. So there's a huge shift, and as has been touched upon so far, the amount of data that's required is tremendous for this, and the only way that we can do it is by having interconnected systems that are simplistic to use. You let the machines do the hard work. Humans define the requirements, machines do the hard work. You get, at the end of it, everyone's happy and they get this building is safe. That's where we want to be.
So we've got a question here of how can supply chain members help in this process, machine manufacturers and so on, to actually help an early pre-planning stage in this BIM process. Ken, maybe start us off with this.
We need collaboration. It has to be a delivery team rather than a design team or a construction team. It needs to be a collective approach. There's a nervousness about obviously engaging with the supply chain too early. But then again, when it comes down to DFMA, you probably need supply chain input at very early stage of a project to make it actually work. If you're going to pursue construction industrialization as well. But there's always been a general approach, and certainly from some of the larger contractors, that they like to be second to be first. Or is it first to be second? Sorry, first to be second. They like somebody else to prove the technology and the innovation before they adopt it themselves. So it's a challenge for the supply chain, and always will be. And then collaboration contracts, various forms have been tried over the years, but they seem to, it's the blow hot and cold. They work sometimes and then they disappear. But I think collectively to gather all the data that's needed, everybody has to work together. And I think the term was we. Paul said it earlier, it was we. It's not you, it's not them, it's we, collectively.
This is going to be a relatively controversial thing to say, particularly when talking about collaboration. I think with the collaboration contracts that work, everyone who was involved in the contract understood the power of it, went forward with it. As soon as you have one organization that's part of that doesn't want to collaborate, the whole thing falls down. But you need everyone on board.
Yeah.
On top of that, with collaboration, there's I kind of split it into three different types of relationships you have with people in a collaborative environment. One is truly collaborative. You help me, I help you, we're important, we need to make sure this goes forward. There's a lot of give and take, there's a lot of risk that both of you are undertaking implicitly or implied, basically, implied or explicit. The second type is kind of a cooperative type of relationship you have with people. You value their opinion, but they're not necessarily as impactful to the whole process as someone else within the process. And the third one is transactional. Sometimes you just need a transactional relationship with someone on a project. From a painter's point of view, can I please have the information? You don't necessarily need to understand, the true ins and outs of what's required in terms of the painting, in terms of inside of a room, unless it's causing obviously major issues, at which point then yes, you do. But it's understanding what relationship is required at what point in the process. That's when you start getting a lot more of the data coming through, because sometimes you just need the information. It's as simple as that.
Quite insightful one. Scott, from an architect's point of view, in at least pre-planning stage, what can a manufacturer do to contribute?
So I think it's early stages, pre-planning. We're looking for fixity and design. We're ideally looking for a project that is stable and robust and can be delivered after the approval. So we want robust coordination. We want a cost plan that's robust. We want security and performance. And so much of that can come from the supply chain. So we are definitely up for deeper conversations earlier on a project, particularly if it's properly supported by a procurement strategy that promotes that and makes it real. Otherwise, we'll be hesitant about over documenting, going too far ahead of the reality of the contract. So with the right procurement structure, with the right brief, with the right collaborative approach, there's room for deeper engagement, more detail upfront.
Johnny, you got any thoughts on this?
I think sort of thoughts are that I think with whole new legislation coming in, I think the good companies are going to survive, and those that can't and aren't up for it won't. I really see there'd probably be a lot of consolidation in the market happened. And it's, all we need to do is look at where this has came in before in petrochemical, oil and gas industries, where when they start getting much more rigorous regulation, that the bigger players, and bigger doesn't just mean that it was a good players, ones who can do things, who understand what the current issues are and get behind it and make the changes now. So that's one of the sort of things that I see potentially going to happen out of this, and I don't see it as a bad thing, because I think actually what it will do is drive much better quality. It will increase profit margins for those who are there. It will allow more innovation, allow more investment in things. So I don't see it purely as a bad thing. I see it as a good thing. I see the industry changing to be a much better place, and that's for much better place for the supply chain, for contractors, for the client, where there's enough margins in it that everybody can go on and do a good job in it and deliver high quality products over and over again. Because we can deliver brilliant high quality products, but we just don't do it repeatably enough.
So linking on with this, there was a question with in regards to technologies and what is there any particular technologies which help the DFM side of things. It's probably a question for you, Ken, unless anyone else wants to answer it.
DFMA is not about technology. DFMA is about process and behaviours.
Yeah.
It's adopting a different way of working. I think the panel have actually spoken about a lot of the things that are involved in DFMA. There's no specific technology which is particularly advantageous for DFMA.
Probably completely depends on what the product is you're talking about as well, I guess.
Yep.
Anyone else got any thoughts?
I think I agree. It's a process, and from a design perspective, it's can you be an enabler to an off-site solution? So that is controlling complexity, controlling component repetition, standardizing your approach whilst delivering the quality that we want to achieve and our clients want to achieve. But it absolutely can be done. You can control design, you can control complexity, and you can control repetition and deliver a good outcome, despite that focus.
Were you about to say something, George?
Yeah, I was going to say, to tie together the last question in this, I think as far as the supply chain is concerned, what is critical is for us to really come back to introducing trust into the process, because far too much effort goes into trying to defend against somebody else not collaborating or not providing the right information. And I think if we can achieve a higher level of trust, that's important. And I think that's starting to happen, where main contractors are being expected to deliver zero defects, better information, safer buildings, more carbon friendly buildings. The relationships need to change. They can't just go for the lowest price. And therefore, the trust aspects of things, I think, is going to have a big impact. So I think having those type of relationships with supply chains is going to be important.
So one of the questions we've got here is about Grenfell. And was it not collaboration which befuddled and overwhelmed building control? I don't know if any of you got any particular thoughts on that. I guess it probably defines how you define collaboration, but any thoughts on that particularly?
Sorry, what was the question? I didn't quite.
Collaboration at Grenfell, was it not that which befuddled and overwhelmed building control?
I don't know enough about it.
I've got one point just to add on to what I was saying that answers that, and that's risk transfer. So the trust bit, well, I should have said in part of that, the fundamental problem, and that happened at Grenfell, it was about risk transfer. So people were transferring the risk down and down and down to the person that is least able to actually
manage the risk.
deliver against it. And that's what we've got to reverse. What we need to do is make sure that the at the highest end, and that's really what we're trying to do with the golden thread, the client is actually responsible, and then the main contractor is actually responsible. So we've got this process through that. So that's I think important.
It's an interesting question, and it's a one which somebody made to me earlier in the day actually about the most likely person to sign a contract and a ream thick is the person which doesn't understand it. Yeah. And it's probably a warning sign to watch out for.
The risk management issue is quite important. I think a few term forms of contract have actually looked at joint management of risks by clients and by contractors, but they're not used very often. And I think the importance of that emphasises what George has said. It's important to identify who is best placed to mitigate the risk, rather than trying to just shove it down the chain. And because all that happens is that the bottom line figure keeps going up, because if you don't understand the risk and you can't mitigate it, what you're going to do, you're going to throw some money at it.
I think there's a really interesting point there. It ties up with procurement, and there's a link to information and process quality. There's a fundamental shift occurring, I feel, around where value is perceived in projects and how you capture and realise value in projects. So if I could sort of generalise, design and build procurement. There's often late decision making, and you try to secure value by leaving decisions late and speculating in the market. Now we're challenged in a way to kind of turn that on its head, because late decision making is a risk that needs to be managed by earlier decision making, fixity, validation, compliance in a project. And we'll be challenged to do that at Gateway 2 to a level that we simply haven't before. So the value management objectives of procurement are shifting. And again, that's what we see in the briefs that we receive from our clients. The model is shifting, and you can deliver those objectives, those value management objectives, through different forms of procurement, provided you're clear what you're trying to achieve.
What Ken just mentioned earlier, which is the different forms of contract. There's one form of contract that's won awards the last 3 or 4. There was one last week, and it comes around to something called integrated project insurance. And I was a member of the research team that actually put that together. And the point is that the client needs to be part of the team. Yeah. So therefore, the changes that Scott was just talking about there often come from the client, but they've got no equity in the impact of those changes. Whereas under IPI, they are a team member, and if they ask for something, that is properly vetted by the rest of the team. And if the rest of the team think that that's going to impact on the risk, then it doesn't happen. Yeah. So that's a really important thing. And when we were putting it together, one of the biggest, everybody thought it was a great idea. There was no PI cover on it. So the whole thing is carried by single project insurance. So everybody's covered on the same thing. And everybody thinks it's a great idea until you've actually put it in front of the lawyers. And the clients that we'd signed up that were very keen to do it. One of them was the MOD. They were very keen to do it, but they couldn't, because their lawyers wouldn't let them be in a situation where they couldn't sue the supply chain. Yeah, but that's changing. Like I say, it's just the IPI has just won 3 awards. For the latest one was the museum in Derby, which has been it's won all sorts of awards. So that's I think that's encouraging.
One of the precursors to that, which is where my experience comes from, was called prime contracting, and that came out of the Egan report.
Yeah.
If my memory serves me well, and it was the MOD who trialled all of that.
Building down barriers.
Yes,
That's where it came from.
Basically started in 1998, and then it was trialled through the prime contracts for managing the estate. But there was a loss of trust, and trust's just been mentioned. That it needs to be reintroduced, but the Treasury doesn't trust the supply chain. That was one of the issues.
So something really interesting points there. We've had a question: is BIM proven to reduce risk and cost and program overrun? Obviously, we've got the risk bit we've just been talking about there. Johnny, have you got any thoughts on the other aspects of it?
Yeah, so I think to get back to what is it that the BIM golden thread audit is trying to do? It's by control. A lot of it for me is by controlling of things, and that's what like and understanding the risk. That's where I think BIM really comes in. It's like you need to be able to understand that risk, have data on the risk, being able to do analysis on whatever the risk is, and then being able to control that risk. So I see BIM as information management is really big part of being able to do risk on buildings, and obviously we have all our existing stock now that needs to go through it, and we need to fully understand that. What the HSE are going to know is like, what are your risks in your building? How are you controlling those risks? How can you tell me that building is safe? And it's the digital control process of information that enables you to do it. There's obviously the human element project. We're going to need people who have a lot of competency and expertise to go out and understand the buildings. But then once you do, it's about then putting all that into a BIM system, if that's what you want to call it, into an information management control platform that has risk built into it. So we need to, often we decouple a lot of these systems. So we often decouple or they're completely separate. How we have one system for risk, another one for this, another one for quality, another one for everything, and none of them are in any way related to each other. And that has to change. It's where like the golden thread of pulling all of that together, you're managing it in a unified, like holistic way. I see BIM ways of working really helping out with risk management.
So this is back to Andrew's point about kind of technology being a means to an end. I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Andrew.
Yeah, everyone focuses on technology as being the be all and end all, and it has to, throw some technology at it, it'll work. No, it doesn't happen like that. I think there's plenty of examples in construction, outside of construction, where people have tried throwing technology at something and it's not stuck, and it's not proven to work for a while. Going back to the whole, does BIM work? One of the biggest difficulties, that was one of the common questions I used to have when I was doing digital management and BIM management a couple of years ago. Proved to me that it works. And it's very hard to do that because who's to say whether a clash that's being picked up at an early stage in the project wouldn't have been picked up by a competent site team that wouldn't have noticed it before it went up into place. It's very difficult to say without running two buildings with exactly the same people, with exactly the same design, the same supply chain, one using technology, one not using technology. It's almost impossible to try. But what it 100% is proven is that it does increase communication. It removes a lot of grey. A lot of construction is grey. You spoke about early or late decision making. A lot of the time, I've noticed that if you put in front of people room data sheets, spreadsheets, RDD, so reviewable design data, C sheets, all these various other forms of information that we in construction deal with on a day-to-day basis, the vast majority of people, it's hieroglyphics to them. They don't get it, which means that they can't make a decision. If I gave you a bill of materials for a BMW and said, I need you to approve this before you, and I need you to buy it, you'll take months looking through it, trying to work out what's going on with it because you don't understand the information. So the advantage of BIM was the information management, which then helped provide or helped better communicate the complicated information in an easier format for people to understand what's going on. And like Johnny said, with the Golden Thread Initiative, there will be a lot of data involved with that. But if done right, the ability to communicate quickly and efficiently the difficult stuff to allow people to sign it off because they understand what it is, that's the point of it. There's just a lot of process in the background.
We've got a question of how can we drive a sustainability agenda better with BIM? Scott, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting question. So in our business, we're looking at a more integrated modeling approach. So we're looking at ways that we can use plugins with Revit to analyze building performance and carbon earlier in the process. And we're interested, I guess, just, because of our own objectives, but of course there's more coming now in terms of what clients require and planning requirements to understand performance of buildings. So I think the direction of travel is a kind of more intelligent, integrated approach with longer range view on the building, the project. Am I looking at, I don't know, 30-year lifespan for a brick slip system, or am I looking for hopefully 100 years plus for hand-laid bricks? And what does that mean for carbon? So I hope we'll have more intelligent, better informed discussions on the method of construction, local or offshore procurement, to have a more refined design proposal and carbon model earlier in the process.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I think the key here is a post-occupancy evaluation, which could be done at various different levels. It could be an analysis of the construction process to understand how development's been put together. It could be an analysis of the performance data with the building in terms of its heat load, or whether it's cooling. In other words, it's building services. It could be the performance of the delivery team, the overall delivery team. And I think collecting that data and analysing it can be used to inform the process for future developments, and highlight to us where we need to take action to reduce the carbon footprint overall of development.
Johnny, you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think the whole net zero thing, obviously it's a big factor affecting our industry. Obviously, if we really want to tackle it, we need to understand the problems, and that's where like information comes and data and analysis comes in. Obviously, we can do having all of these new technologies now allow us to process so much more data, and then we can take the data from both design and also the data from occupancy from our existing buildings, so we can put things into our buildings. Now, when you start to combine that together, we can get much better whole life cycle costing analysis done, so that our buildings then when they get designed, they actually perform how they're meant to. Like, way too often our buildings get handed over and they just don't perform anywhere near it. The service charges are higher than expected, and all of these things. And I think, it's been able to now get into really detailed information on every single asset, being able to manage that, understand all of that from an early design stage. So right from the very early design stages, being able to have a fairly accurate prediction of how that building is going to perform is where we're going to it. We're not there yet because in part we don't have some of the data on our existing assets, but as this data set gets better and we have the tools now to be able to manage it, and we have things like AI and other things like that, although I'm skeptical about, I get so people phone me up all the time trying to sell me some of these systems and they just don't work. But the industry is moving there. We will get there. I am confident. And I think in a few years' time, from very early design stages, we will be able to predict exactly how that building is going to work in real life and not in design life, where people leave doors and windows open and so on. So I think the technology is there. We get a bit more data and we understand it a bit more. We can really progress the industry.
George?
I think there's two elements. One is making sure, as I said earlier, making sure that we know what products and materials go into the buildings, what their embedded carbon is, and what's the embedded carbon of the systems that they're part of and supporting. And then adding to that, what Ken and Johnny have just talked about, which is the whole issue of how is the building actually being used. So how is the post-occupancy evaluation being measured? And critical to that, which is something we've been very bad at in the BIM world, and that is actually structuring organizational information requirements. So in other words, making sure that we know what that building is designed to do, what activities is it supporting, because it's only those, if you can define those at the beginning, you've then got something measurable from a point of view of post-occupancy evaluation. If the client hasn't really thought through what it is they're actually going to be using those spaces for, what activities are going to be used in those spaces, then you don't really have an effective joined up way of measuring things. And I think that's an important element.
Well, it looks like we're at the end of our time, but perhaps if we can have a key takeaway, Andrew. Yeah.
I hate being the one to go first. In terms of the overall question of, construction, digitized, modernized, I think it is literally a case of digitize or die. There's no two ways about it. The modern world is so digital these days that it will be impossible to function as a business within construction within the next decades if you're not digital in some way, shape, or form. You have to embrace it. You have to jump onto it and work out a way to go with it. But at the same time, it's nowhere near as scary as people make it seem to be. It's actually a lot easier than people think to be digital and to be able to provide the information and engage with consultants, supply chain, whoever, throughout the process. So, there's lots of resources out there. UK BIM Framework, the UK BIM Alliance, they got some great help there. I know that there's lots of other publications that exist out there from CDBB and various other industry organizations, Construction Innovation Hub, etc., that all run through this stuff. Some good guidance, but digitize.
Takeaway for us, Scott?
I think I go back to that sort of sense of optimism, actually. I think there's clearly this enormous challenge around data, safety, collaboration, but so many teams I see really working hard to respond, and I see significant shifts in behavior and outcomes in design teams, see it on the sites that we're involved with technology shift. And now, as I mentioned earlier, I think clients' briefing requirements are really stepping up. So there's a huge amount of work to do over the next couple of years, particularly around fire safety. But I feel optimistic about trajectory and the energy levels in the sector to get to where we need to be.
Johnny?
Yeah, I think very much the same. I also think that the change is going to happen very quickly. I think we're at that tipping point now where there's lots of things from MMC, obviously legislation, building safety. Legislation is brilliant for driving change because you just have to do it. There's no out of it, So I think the technology has advanced a lot. That tipping point now where our industry is going to change to be a much better place, and I mean that for everyone, from the people who are working in hopefully being a less stressful environment, obviously, as we've seen with the charities and stuff here today, I think the whole industry will change to be a better place. I think that's going to happen much quicker than we think. It will all be there, and suddenly people will look back in a few years and won't recognise our industry at all. I think that change is going to happen with the residential sector first, because that's where the legislation mainly affects, but it doesn't affect. But just to be clear, the legislation is for all buildings, and some part of the legislation affect everybody in the industry, no matter what sector they work in, and particularly the competencies and other parts of the legislation. But I think positive industry is going to be much, much better place.
George?
The key message I would give is that we're talking about digital. That's what this session's about. And digital means machine readable data. It doesn't mean PDFs. And that's an important point to make, because if we're going to progress, we need to be able to have digital machine readable information that can then be consumed in lots of different ways according to for different purposes.
Okay.
I would perhaps go the converse of what George has just said, in so much as not so much that digitization is not important, but the key words are modernise or die. And I think digitization is one of the enablers, and it's one of many enablers.
I agree with that.
I think from my point of view, understand what the purpose of what you're trying to achieve is, and digital is, as you say, it's a way of actually achieving the end result. So certainly and make sure you know who you're collaborating with and why you're doing it. Thank you very much for your time, everyone, and thank you very much for your time and
Thank you.
input on the panel.
Thanks.
Thanks.